In this video, we're going to take a look at sector area. Now, before we look at areas of sectors, just like we did this with circumference and arc length, we want to talk about the area of a circle and then think about how can we split this circle up. So remember that the area of a circle, let's move that there, okay? The area of a circle is found by pi r squared. So what you would end up with, if I was finding the area of this first circle, would just be pi times 6 squared, right? And over here, if 18 is my diameter, notice how it's in the middle of that line, so that would imply that's the diameter. So if I want just a radius, say from here to here, that would be 9, or pi 9 squared. All right, so that's a quick review on area. Now, what if I only want an area of a section of a circle? So we call it a sector. When we're talking about the area, we call it a sector. Well, what we would do would be the exact same thing we did with arc length. What we're going to do is we're going to say, how much circle am I talking about out of the whole thing? So make that fraction, angle over 360, and then multiply by area of the whole circle. So here's the official formula for sector area. It's angle over 360 times pi r squared. Okay, where pi r squared is the area of a circle, angle over 360 is the part of the circle that I have. How much circle am I talking about? What's the area of the circle? So let's go ahead, let's solve a couple problems. This should be pretty straightforward. So find the sector area. So this is just going to be 120 over 360 times pi r squared. So let's go ahead and solve this in terms of pi, and then we'll round to the nearest tenth. So 120 over 360 times 15 squared. That gets me 75 times pi. Okay? And if I multiply pi in, I end up with something like 235.6. So as always, pay attention to what the prompt is asking for. If it asks for round to the nearest tenth, that means multiplied with pi in. If it asks in terms of pi, that means some answer like that, some number times pi. Let's look at two more here, and we're just going to set them up, because if you can set them up, you should be able to solve them. So find the shaded area. So notice on this first shaded area that we don't actually have our angle. We've got part of our angle, but we're missing this part right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to solve for that missing angle. So I know the whole circle is 360 degrees, so I'm doing 360 minus 135, and that should tell me how many degrees remain in that circle. So I end up with 225 degrees. So if I was to set this first circle for the sector area up, it would be 225 over 360 times pi 24 squared. All right, let's look at the second one. We have the angle, right? So we've got that 90 degrees, 90 over 360, times pi r squared. Pi. Now, is that 8 a radius or a diameter? Well, notice where 8 is placed. It's kind of right in the middle of this entire line. So that tells me that that's the distance to that whole line. So if I only want a radius, I'm going to cut that in half and get 4. Okay, so my radius here is 4. So it would be pi 4 squared. All right, so we would set those up, solve them however the prompt directs you, but this is very similar to arc length, so we're not going to spend a lot of time. I do want to look at one particular word problem. You'll see problems like this pretty regularly in arc length and sector area. So Kiera wants to cut a pizza with a diameter of 12 inches into 8 slices. What is the area of one slice? All right, so if we have our angle and we have our radius, we're in business, right? We can plug those in. So the radius here is equal to 6, and the angle, well, I know that I'm dealing with 1 out of 8. So what I could do is 1/8, I could find 1/8 of 360 degrees. How many degrees is that equal to? So we'll do it that way, and then I'll kind of show you a shortcut. And also, it'd be helpful if you could see the whole problem. Yes? Let's see if I can move this so you actually can see. There we go. That should be good. All right, here we go. So, so she has a diameter of 12 inches. She wants to cut it into 8 slices. So one way to do this would be to solve for the angle. I know she wants 1/8 of the pizza times 360, and that comes out to 360 divided by 8, which is 45 degrees. So that comes out to 45 degrees. You could solve it this way. It's a little bit the long way around, but it will totally work. 360 times pi 6 squared, all right? And that would come out to, it doesn't specify, so I'm going to leave it in terms of pi. And it comes out to 4.5 pi. Okay, that'll be the area. Now, let me show you a different way to do this, a way that's actually even easier. Remember, what is the whole point? Let me do it in a different color so we can kind of see the difference here. What is the whole point of doing the angle over 360? Well, isn't it to determine how much of the circle we're talking about? Well, in this case, I don't need to do 45 over 360. How much of the circle am I talking about? Well, 1 out of 8. I'm talking about 1/8. But if we were to reduce 45 over 360, do you know what we get? Still 1/8. So in this case, we can actually, if we're thinking about the formula, we can actually save ourselves a couple steps. And this would still be pi 6 squared, and that would still come out to 4.5 pi. But instead of having to solve for the angle and then divide that angle by 360, you could also just say, well, I have 1/8 of the circle. Now, if that's kind of confusing to you and you'd rather just solve for the missing angle and then do that, hey, knock yourself out. That's going to be just fine. But I do want you to think about what's happening in these problems. And in this particular problem, if we're thinking about how much of the circle we have, we can actually save ourselves some steps on setting up our formula. So this wraps up our lesson on finding sector area.